Being stealth, people think it's because you want to have this big launch or you want to hide your idea. That's actually the dumbest reason to be stealth. We were stealth because we didn't want anyone to have preconceived notions of what we were, so that we could just iterate and pivot as fast as possible and not have to explain to anybody why yesterday we were this and tomorrow we were that.
This is Funded, a show where founders who raised millions in venture capital share the gritty side of what it actually took to get that money in the bank. I'm Jason Ye. Not too long ago, I was trying to get my ideas funded. And back in the day, I was a VC listening to founders pitch me for money. There's this funny thing about fundraising that doesn't really get talked about. From the outside, it looks like a clean, straight line. Build, pitch, raise money, scale. But when you're in it, you realize just how much more goes into fundraising and building a venture scalable company. For most first-time founders, you end up getting burnt out by the process. I know I did. You get told the same advice over and over again that doesn't really make sense to you, and you're stuck trying to translate vision into traction while the clock is ticking. But what happens when you're not doing it for the first time? What happens when the founder is a former VC who also built and sold a company before and still decides to go back to zero, take no investor meetings even with hordes of VCs waiting for him, and grind it out with just one other person in a tiny office? In today's episode, I get to talk to Alex Salazar, co-founder and CEO of Arcade. We get to talk about what it's actually like to raise when you're not just a founder, but a former investor yourself who's built and sold a company successfully. We get into why they stayed in stealth, how they ran dozens of customer tests without building anything, and how you know when an idea is finally clicking, which ultimately led them to raising their $12 million seed round. This episode is especially illuminating because I get a chance to talk to Alex, an experienced fundraiser who understands both sides of the table, to connect the dots for first-time founders, to clarify the lessons they can take from his experience with this company. But before we get into the company or the raise, we talked about where it all started, at home, with a mom who was building a tech company and quietly setting the blueprint.
Okay, so one, I was incredibly lucky. This is going to date me, but my mom was in the tech industry, right? My mom had started what's called a value-added reseller, and so she was a distributor for IBM and HP and Compaq and companies you never heard of anymore, called like Oki Data and stuff like that. And she was a distributor for all of these like big tech companies, back in the early 80s, to Latin America and the Caribbean. And so I very much grew up around the industry. And as a result of all of this, I was one of the first kids in my neighborhood to have a real personal computer in his bedroom. And this is also before, video games became like, this thing that parents were worried about. And so my parents very much put video games on my computer for me. And at the time, the video games are all pretty crappy, and I was young, so the only real video games that they could give me were like educational video games, like math games, stuff like that. And so, at a really early age, I was jamming on computers before anybody else my age was, and that's kind of where my love of tech started. Also, my love of video games. And so, as I got older, I, like many of my friends who were really into video games, I'd started building my own rig. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And because my parents were computer distributors, like I had the catalogs, so I could just order like the individual like RAM and CPUs, and I could like spec it out to the nines because I didn't have to go to the store. I could just order directly from, Asus and Intel and all these different people. And then, and NVIDIA in the early days when NVIDIA was just like a graphics card company.
Yeah.
And so I was always decked out on like the coolest rig, and I had assembled every last little inch of it. But it was really, really more love of video games than anything else. I always thought I was gonna be a doctor or something, like until I took AP Bio my senior year, and then I had a total like identity crisis because I realized I hated fucking bio. I was not like a memorization based person, but at the same exact time I was acing physics, and I'd already applied to pre-med for college. And so like, I'd kind of hit this realization a little too late. And so, I had ultimately like not gone to the universities I was planning on going to.
Hmm.
I ended up going to a local university my first year called Florida International University. Go Golden Panthers, I think.
Yeah.
And while I was trying to figure out like what it is I wanted to study, because I bounced around I bounced around very quickly, thank God. I bounced around a few different majors within the span of 2 quarters. And so I quickly went from like not really knowing what I wanted to do to knowing I wanted to do engineering to knowing I wanted to do computer engineering to realizing I didn't like bread boxes and physical shit to like studying I wanted to do computer science. And all of that quickly that I transferred out to Georgia Tech and then, had the career that I had.
So let me pause you there. Your mom was a distributor. Was it her own business, or did she work for a bigger company? I'd be curious what your influence on entrepreneurship was.
Yeah, I'm still trying to live up to my mom's shadow. My mom was incredible. So my mom, this is my mom's first company she had started as a computer distributor. She was the first computer scientist. She was the first female computer scientist, I think, to come out of Columbia, the country. And for sure, the first female computer scientist to graduate from Florida International University in Miami. And so like this, the roots go deep in this. And so this is her first tech distribution company. She sold it when I was around, I want to say like 9. And so, our family went from being like very middle income to, suddenly doing quite well. But mom was really good about it. Mom like actually never showed it. So we didn't move. We lived in the same exact house.
Amazing.
We just took nicer vacations. And then mom started her second one when I was about 12 in 6th grade. And it was, and like the first one, it was started in our garage, right?
Wow.
In the hallway next to my bedroom is where all of the phone calls and faxes were going out. And so, from a really early age, I got to see and be a part of companies being started.
Wow.
And that company also, both those companies were Inc. 500. Mom was on TV. Mom was on Oprah at one point, right? Like talking about starting companies, right? And so I had front row seats to all of this, and my mom believed in child labor. And so at the age of 10, I was stuffing envelopes, right? For mailings. By the age of 15, I was cold calling Africa to go sell computers.
Wow.
So literally going down the African phone book.
So Alex, I'm very curious about this because just like trying to work backwards from where you got to. But you said that you were interested in being pre-med. How is this not just like preordained that you would be an entrepreneur? Like, tell me a little bit about that disconnect.
Yeah, it never even occurred to me. I saw how hard mom was working, and I was never like, oh, that sounds awesome. Let me go do that. But you never fully appreciate how much osmosis is kicking in. And so, my sister and I, my sister's also successful in tech as well. So, she's a VC. We just never fully appreciated how much osmosis, we were in. And so, we knew my mom's personnel issues. We knew when she was firing people. We knew when there were server issues. We knew when, there was currency, devaluations in Argentina. Like we before we knew how to drive. But we didn't know the value of it because, when you're a teenager, you don't know what matters. And so, I wanted to be a pediatrician. And that was it. And there was, my mom's credit, my mom's pretty loose about it. My mom was never like, you're going to follow in my footsteps in any. Her thing was just like, hey, this very immigrant parent. She was like, hey, you're going to either be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, or an entrepreneur, like pick. Right. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to be a doctor. And that was it. Like,
super interesting. As a side note, it's funny. My mom is a chemist, a PhD in chemistry, and my dad has a PhD in physics. And I had this similar thing with you, where like I was going down this path around like chemistry, and I remember it being just rote memorization because there was all these exceptions. It was never just like a logical string. Whereas I was super attracted to physics because it was like certain laws and then just play it all out, which then drove me to computer science as well.
I'll give you a funny anecdote. This is kind of like these moments when you're in the right place at the right time, or when you're doing your calling. I had not yet really landed in computer science just yet.
Yeah.
That's when things really went vertical for me, like personally. But um, I struggled so hard to just get good grades in biology and chemistry because of the memorization, all the exceptions, and all this stuff. But when it came to physics, I was now already in college. I was taking like a college level physics class, electromagnetics, and I hadn't studied for an exam. I hadn't even I just completely whiffed. Right, I hadn't even done the homework. So like I literally I just did not know what we were about to get tested on, and I just mathed my way through the test.
Yeah.
And I got a B.
What again?
And that's when I knew I was like, I'm in the right place. Like I didn't understand any of the fucking concepts, but I mathed my way into, being ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
And so I can do this for a living.
Yeah. And I think like this is where I'm going to sort of accelerate the storytelling and jump you to a different point, because I mean, the thing that I'm pulling out here is a bit of a love of like problem solving. And I think that's kind of like where this builder mentality, especially one that is rooted in like computer science training, et cetera. And we're going to kind of jump over a lot. I think you've gotten probably a lot of opportunities to talk about your previous successes and the companies that you had started. But the topic that we want to talk about really is fundraising, especially fundraising for this current company. And you are, square in one of the biggest booms we've ever seen around the growth in AI. And as a side note, I'll just say, like, I think there's something very interesting about how people growing up with AI as a core technology are going to have to evolve, because I think you see it, I see it too. The problem solving training that we got, not having AI do all these things for us, allows us to use AI really, really well. And I'm just curious what happens this new generation. Similar but differently, fundraising is something that I think is like completely changed with this, like what you call vertical takeoff of AI. And what I want us to accelerate to like set the stage is, tell me a little bit about the starting point of Arcade. I don't know if you call it Arcade Dev or Arcade, but because I look at your quick background. You had been an entrepreneur, you'd sold a company, you were a venture capitalist. You're probably having a pretty comfy life. I want to hear a little bit about jumping into your next thing. Like, what pulled you in?
Yeah.
And did you know from the very beginning that you would go run another venture-backed startup? So let's start there.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'd been acquired. So this is, I started a company called Stormpath, sold it to Okta, was at Okta for 3 years. And when you get acquired, there's always like, these packages that have you stick around for a while.
Yeah.
And so mine was a 3-year contract, and I'd stuck around a little bit longer as I wanted to kind of land the plane on a project I was on. And my plan the whole time I was at Okta, all 3 years, was I'm going to start another company, right? I'm going to start another company. And it was really interesting because, for anyone paying attention in the product team at Okta, there was a very obvious market opportunity that no one was really tackling very well, that was just ripe for a company to be started. And I saw it, and a few other people that I worked with really saw it. And a number of us individually, separately, had started to really get the machinery going to go start companies to go tackle that space. And more than one ultimately did. But I ultimately pulled back at the last minute. And I was like, no, I'm not. And for me personally, I couldn't get over this nagging feeling that cloud computing, SaaS, was just mature. It was kind of like that wave was over. And I didn't want to go start a company in a mature wave. So much of the success we had in my first company was because we had just caught this really early cloud computing, cloud infrastructure, developer API services market right as it was starting, and the tide raised all the boats, and we were one of the boats. And so you can make a lot of mistakes when that stuff's happening because there's so much white space. You can just bob and weave in every direction.
Yeah.
When a market's like mature and old and kind of like, already pretty crowded, you don't have a lot of white space. Like, you've got to nail the thing you start with.
Can I pause you there? Because there's an interesting thing that I want you to react to, is like, you were excited about an opportunity, but did seem like other people were seeing it, and you were in a mature market, right? And so you decided to pull back. You knew that you wanted to start a company though, and what I'm getting at is like the importance of project selection here, right? Did you ever have that feeling like, oh God, well now I don't have like, is there this anxiety to be like, well, will there be
Yeah.
another wave? Because I've had conversations with friends about waves that we've missed, mobile, crypto, like things that we didn't like try
Yeah.
to ride the wave around. It's like, will there ever be another huge wave? Like, what was going through your head?
Yeah. So I very much had that. I mean, my wife will tell you like just how, how hard I was actually like taking it. Right.
Mm,
I knew I was starting out of the company. I was ready. I wanted to, I needed it. And the opportunity wasn't there. And, and so to your point, opportunity selection is like 90% of the game.
mm,
And I've seen so many of my friends like kind of force a startup because they want to be entrepreneurs and not because there's an opportunity that's screaming to get started.
yeah,
And like, I don't wish those outcomes on anybody because that is 5 years of your life that you were just lighting on fire, and it's super stressful and
yeah,
you don't get a financial outcome. And so
yeah,
like, what was the fucking point? And so I didn't want to do that. But in terms of waves, like there's always a wave, man. Like, through human civilization, there's always more waves, and the waves are just coming faster.
yeah,
And so I was pretty confident a wave was going to come. Um, and I think by this point it was pretty obvious that there was going to be an AI wave, and just no one knew exactly what it was going to look like. Enough people were already talking about it, enough was percolating in AI. So I felt confident there'd be another wave. I couldn't tell you when, but I had already personally allocated 24 months of my time. Like, before I decided to go to venture, I'd already kind of talked to my wife and said, hey, you know what? Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take 24 months, and all I'm going to do for 24 months is I'm going to go do like just embed myself and just, put myself in the path of luck, and just go re-immerse myself with engineers, re-immerse myself with customers, and just see like where there's desperate need for something that's authentic to me.
yeah,
Um, and it's a model I've seen other people I know really well like pull off. It's a model that felt right to me. And then at the same time, I was getting a lot of outreach for venture. And at the time, there was just a lot of stuff happening in venture. A lot of people were retiring. A lot of venture firms had decided that they needed fresh GP blood. And everybody's wish list was exited founder who's worked at a successful company with a Stanford MBA and a computer science background in the developer kind of space. And so like
check.
I checked all of those. I was getting every phone call out there. And so venture capital is always this opportunity that entrepreneurs like all dream to go in because you're going to do half the work and get paid twice as much. And so I was really lucky. I had a friend of mine who had just started his second fund. Like he had just raised fund 2 for his like early stage deep tech firm. And so, and he was very generous with like how he was structuring the firm. It was very benchmark like in terms of voting and economics. And so I was super fortunate. I got an offer to join him, and not having a real opportunity in my mind, and pandemic had just hit. I didn't want to be alone in my house playing video games. I ultimately decided to go join him and go try and be a VC. When I'd gone into VC, I had actually committed to myself that I was going to go be a lifelong VC. I was going to be the best VC that had ever lived. Right. But I was going to be a VC. Like it wasn't intentionally like a stepping stone starting another company.
Okay. That's okay. So let's keep going with this because you are in venture capital. It is a great seat to be in if you wanted it to be a stepping stone, right? All you're doing is absorbing ideas that are coming in. All you're doing is like meeting the right people that could be co-founders, employees, customers, etc. But something happens, some sort of light goes off that makes you believe that wave is coming and that you need to like jump off the VC boat and start paddling, right? So tell me a little bit about what you saw and what was the thought?
Yeah, so there were like 3 major milestones that ultimately led to me starting a company, and they happened in quick succession. So, I'm in VC. AI is already pretty hot, but it's not. It wasn't yet like this tectonic shift. It was more just like everybody knew the wave was coming, but all the companies, nobody was really breaking out yet. Nothing was really like there wasn't a platform. And but you could tell something was coming. And so like all the deals that we're seeing were AI companies. And I was passing on most of them because a bunch of different reasons. But one of my mentors is an incredible VC, former incredible VC, a guy named Andy Ratcliffe, who started Benchmark Capital.
Wow.
And so I called Andy and I was like, "Hey Andy, I'm in VC now. How do I go be an incredible VC?" And he's like, "Look, it's really simple, Alex. You gotta nail deal flow. And if you have great deal flow, you'll have great, you'll have opportunity for great decision making and great deals. But everything will kind of cascade from there." I was like, "God, how do I get great deal flow?" He's like, "Look, I only know one way to do it. There are many ways to do it, but the way I know how to do it is just go meet the top technical talent in the category you're in." And I was like, "I can do that." And so I just started networking with all of the very best people in AI. And then every time I grabbed coffee or lunch with any of them, I'd be like, "Hey, who are the people in AI that you respect the most?" And then I just kept spiderwebbing out until I had a really big portfolio of people that I knew who were like exceptional AI people. And then I met my co-founder. Now I met him in the context of deal flow, and then he ultimately became, my point person for technical diligence on AI companies. So it was never intended for us to go start a company together. And he was the head of AI engineering at Redis. He was the one who turned Redis into a vector database. So he knew a ton about AI, and was in the field, and he knew a lot. And then from there, the AI waves climbing. I've kind of now inadvertently met my co-founder, and then all of a sudden GPT 3.5 drops, and then ChatGPT drops, and that was the first moment where I was like, "Oh shit, this isn't just like a language model. This isn't just a chatbot. Like this is a platform. Like this thing can reason." And because this has an API that can reason, like I felt pretty confident there was going to be a whole series of software applications built on top of this. And sure enough, immediately after that, like every single deal like crossing my table from a venture capital perspective was some sort of wrapper on GPT 3.5.
Yeah.
And 3.5 Turbo came out, and that's with the first tool calling model. And so for people who don't know what tool calling is, it's the AI's ability to go interact with another piece of code, another service. Like the most common example is the model can now go call a weather API. And when I saw that, it was just further reinforcement of what I thought I was feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And to contextualize that in my background, I had the same exact feeling like 10 years ago when EC2 and S3 had come out. And I was like, "Oh man, there's going to be a boom on this." And very specifically, there's going to be a middleware boom. And so I felt that same thing. And I within the firm, I was like, "Guys, it's huge. There's going to be middleware opportunities. All these companies are going to get started." And so, I started to really sharpen my deal flow look, what the deal flow that I was looking at, that I wasn't finding the company that I wanted. Classic founder VC problem is like you envision the company you want, and then you start looking for it, and that's never good. But that's what I was starting to do. And then I fell in love with this one company. And then I got really close to doing the deal, and then ultimately I backed out. And because they weren't going deep enough into LLMs. And I told them that. I was like, "Hey, look, your product's amazing, your tech's incredible, but you're taking like a half step into this. And that's just not what's going to win. Like you're going to be compared too much to the existing vendors in the category you're in. But if you go all in on this new technology, you can't be compared to them because you'll be a different product. And competition sucks. Don't do it." And listening to VCs is never a good thing. They lack context. But sure enough, he ignored everything I said. And I was like, "Well, he's not going to listen to me." So I called up Sam and I was like, "Hey, Sam, like, what if we did this?" and Sam was like, "Let's go." And so, I had a conversation with my venture firm. My venture firm knew, like, they've been out, they know enough founders. They could see the writing on the wall that I was getting the itch. And so, we parted ways really friendly. They're investor at the company. They were first money in, and super supportive. But yeah, I mean, being in VC was incredible because we saw the wave early. Basically, met all the top people that led to me having a very authentic, technically credible, and an amazing co-founder.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, saw an opportunity to go create a company based on where I was seeing gaps in the market.
Yeah. So, we talked a little bit about how this round came together. And I have an idea of where I want to start a conversation. But let's quickly just describe what happened. So you see this and you're like, okay, no one's building this. I'm getting frustrated that people aren't doing the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I know somebody that might want to work with me on this. So I'm going to go do it.
Yeah.
You obviously, this is not a thought of like, maybe I'll bootstrap a nice small company that doesn't move the needle for you anymore. So tell me a little bit about how you thought about capitalizing the company to start.
Yeah.
Exactly what happened.
That's an incredible question, because it was look, when you're a first time founder, you don't know what you're doing with respect to capital. And when you're a second time founder, you've done enough venture capital where you kind of have a read on how to do this right.
And when you're a second time founder that had been a VC in between, then there's a little.
Right. You kind of know what to do, right?
Yeah.
So first things first, I knew I was going to keep it extremely lean in the very first phase. And so we kept it completely stealth. We didn't, nobody knew what we were working on. There was no website. And we took very little capital, just enough to pay Sam, frankly. Like I wasn't even taking a salary. And we got this little tiny office at like a off-brand WeWork called Spaces. They're fantastic. I love them.
Like a little backhanded compliment there.
And we just started grinding, like, I wouldn't say in secret, but in stealth. But we knew what we were doing. Like we had a very clear process where like, we are going to just keep on without writing a single line of product code. This was a big rule. Like we're not going to write any product code. We are going to fake everything, but we're going to immediately day one, we're going to start putting like fake product in front of customers and asking if they're going to pay us $100K for it. And we're going to do that 2 times a day, every day for as long as it takes until we start getting signal. And in that phase, we took no VC meetings, despite everybody losing their freaking minds, because like when a second time founder who's exited, like leaves a venture firm to start a company, suddenly every VC signal goes like off and everybody wants to go have a conversation. And we didn't take a single one of those meetings. Right. And some people got really aggressive, like big people showing up at the door. And we turned everybody down. And then we just kept doing that. And then because it's interesting because being stealth, people think it's because, you want to have this big launch or you want to hide your idea. And that's actually the dumbest reason to be stealth. We were stealth because we didn't want anyone to have preconceived notions on what we were, so that we could just iterate and pivot as fast as possible, not have to explain to anybody why yesterday we were this and tomorrow we were that. It was to just like grease the skids on rapid iteration. And sure enough, our original idea was terrible. It didn't work. Like nobody wanted it. But because we were iterating so fast, we were able, in the span of about 6 months, we were able to go from this idea that we thought was really powerful, and then ultimately nobody wanted to pay for it, to suddenly finding this like massive bottleneck in AI, which is authentication and tool calling. That suddenly like everybody was like, when can I play with it? Like, when can I get access to it? And in that entire period, we didn't take a single VC call. Now, we always knew we were going to capitalize this company with venture capital. And we knew that we were going to go for the long haul, which means we're going to raise a lot of money, multiple rounds, and really try and take this thing all the way as far as we could possibly take it.
What I love here is how deliberate Alex and his co-founder were about running their process. Alex had every opportunity to raise early and didn't. Instead, they stayed small and focused, gathering more information from customers and hunting for something that signaled a big opportunity. After the break, we'll talk about what happened when the idea finally clicked. All right, so the problem with fundraising is that it just seems so simple, right? Fundraising is asking people for money. That's the first big problem. The second big problem is that most of the people that are going out to try to fundraise have been trained their whole lives this idea of fake it till you make it. So those two things combined create one of the biggest challenges that I see with startup founders today, which is why I created Adamant Fundraising. It turns out faking it till you make it when it comes to fundraising is a recipe for wasting a ton of time and getting to suboptimal outcomes or just completely failing. And yes, there's a ton of content online that you can find that will give you little bits of what to do. But if you're looking for a way to bring all the best knowledge from somebody that you trust into one place and surround that with a supportive community, live events that will give you great feedback, and other support structures to make sure that you are doing exactly what you need to do to fundraise the right way, well, then I want you to come check out Adamant Fundraising. Adamant Fundraising is our online program and community that has helped hundreds of founders get through the process successfully, has been a part of raising over $400 million, and it's something that we're extremely proud of. So if this sounds like something that could help you out, check out adamantfundraising.com and reach out online, ask any questions. We'd love to consider having you. All right, back to the show.
And the reason why we knew we were going to do that and not bootstrap and not have something else is that the software markets, especially in hot categories, they don't lend themselves to bootstrapping. Everything happens too fast, right? Like they're winner take all markets. You're either first or everything sucks. Maybe you're second, but you're like a distant second. And being third is like, you might as well not exist. Yeah. And so we knew that if we wanted to increase the odds that we were going to be successful, we had to go for the brass ring, and that was going to take a lot of venture capital. But we wanted to make sure that we were aimed properly before we took capital, because it's very difficult to go find that early product market fit or that early product tug if you've got 10 people on staff and you have boards and you have a bunch of other stuff distracting you. It's easier when it's 2 people in a room.
So I kind of knew this is where the conversation was going to go, right? And what I had described about what's important in an interview like this or a conversation like this is to try to draw some things that other people can take from. And you even brought this up. You're like, oh, I don't know. We were preempted. I kind of know what I was doing. And so I want to make sure we have a conversation that's helpful, right?
Yeah.
And I think what might be fun is for you and I to, right, XVC founders, et cetera. I know why people wanted to back you, right? But if we think about the things that they could believe are true about you in this opportunity, what do we think that the takeaways from a first-time founder who hasn't raised before should understand about this? And I'm going to lead you a little bit so that we can have a more meaningful conversation with texture that other people can react to. But there are certain things that investors need to believe are true about this team and this opportunity when evaluating any deal, right?
Yeah.
There are certain things about you, Alex, that are a little bit easier to believe, right? We don't know if they're actually true, but they're a little bit easier to believe. And I wonder if you can kind of think through those if you were evaluating Alex raising capital for Arcade as a VC. And maybe we can talk about, are there things a first-time founder could do to get close to what you're doing? Do you know what I'm trying to push you towards?
Yeah. So I'm going to oversimplify the venture capital decision-making process, right?
Love it.
There's a lot of facets to it, right? But to oversimplify it, the investor needs to believe that this is going to be, this is a huge opportunity. Mm-hmm. That if this company is successful, it is going to be a decacorn, right? Publicly traded, over $10 billion of market cap, and be an acquirer and not an acquiree. Mm-hmm. And so, because otherwise the economics of venture don't work out, right? Because they need one deal to pay for all the deal. So they need to believe it can be a decacorn. And most of them aren't impulsive. Most of them are going to do some homework and some math. And so what you have to believe first is that the market opportunity, forget the company, but the market opportunity that they're going after, the problem statement, how big it is, the user base, propensity to pay, all that stuff is going to be big enough for that to be true. Now, sometimes you get surprised and there are markets you didn't expect. Cursor's a great example. Who would have thought, a developer IDE was going to be $100 million a year business in a few months? That was unexpected. But many markets you can predict, right? Like AWS, like how big is the server and storage market? It's enormous. It always has been. Um, and so I was operating in a market that is well known to be a very big market.
Yep.
Identity authentication has always been a very big market. We were all, like a big piece of our product. This is in the weeds for agents, but is also in the integrations market, and that's also a very big, very like consistent market. MuleSoft, Workato, Zapier, Tibco before that, like IBM and Oracle still do $1 billion a year of pure integration software, and so it wasn't a very hard market argument to make to a VC. The second piece, so is it a big opportunity where if successful, they can return the fund multiple times over?
Yeah.
The second thing is, okay, is this the team that is going to be able to out execute everybody else?
Yep.
There's a lot of teams out there with great ideas and great markets, but like, that may not be the horse to bet on. And being a second time founder generally helps a lot because there's a lot of mistakes that they're not going to make. There's just a lot of stuff they're going to skip. So if everybody could start their company as a second time founder, everything would be a lot easier, but that's the way it goes. But the other thing is authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
It's very easy for anyone to wake up tomorrow and be like, oh, I'm going to start an AI company or I'm going to start an auth company. But if you're not Sam Partee, my co-founder, and me, like, it's going to be hard for you to make the argument to a high caliber venture capitalist that you're going to go win that market. And given my background in auth and Sam's backgrounds in AI and our combined backgrounds in enterprise, it was also for many VCs like a pretty clear, great combo of opportunity and team.
Awesome. And so I'm going to push you into one more hypothetical here, which is, I think you've described why Sam and Alex are a great team going after a big market. Second time founders like AI, et cetera, et cetera. If you were to back a first time founder who is just getting into market around these things, like, can you talk to me a little bit about the things that, if you're trying to be a little bit aggressive, you're like, well, he's never done it before. She's never done it before.
Yeah.
But I see something or there's something that catches your eye that indicates that you might have caught them early onto that path of becoming the next Alex, the next whatever. And I'll add on one other component here, which like a lot of people love throwing in Calendly as an example of like, that is a dumb, small idea, but like, what is it that catches a VC's eye around something that could be big? So broad strokes here, I want to make sure we kind of like bring this back to something that maybe first owners would hear.
Look, there's always exceptions. There's always going to be these unexpected companies like Calendly and other people. And I'll put those to the side because, I suspect Calendly's first financing round was probably pretty difficult. Or I think they were bootstrapped for a while. I forget.
Yeah.
Right. But let's pretend they were raising a traditional seed. I would expect that their first seed round would have been really difficult because there wasn't like the opportunity, and that it would not have been obvious at that point. But for for the general population of startups, let's presume that they're already articulating a really big market. Put that to the side. What do people look for in a first time founder? And we actually experienced this in my first company because we had this as well. The first thing they look for is, I think, the best VCs is founder market fit, or people sometimes shorthanded to authenticity. Like, are you in a category where you are advantaged over somebody else, right? The business world is not fair. Nobody wants to invest in a company that doesn't have an unfair advantage. And so team is one of the easiest unfair advantages for a VC to filter on. And so when we were starting my last company, we were first-time founders, we had two major advantages. My co-founder was this guy named Les Hazelwood. Les Hazelwood was like the open source creator of this major software security authentication project in the IT Software Foundation. Like everybody knew less. And I had a really strong career at that point, both as a software developer, then eventually as an enterprise sales rep. And so for a VC, it's like, oh, like these guys understand the tech, they're really credible, they're authentic to the space, and they know how to sell. And so like that might be the bet. But the question, to make it more generic, is like, why you? Like, what is it that you know that no one else knows? What is it that you can do that no one else can do or very few other people can do? And why is that super relevant and critical to the opportunity that you're now chasing? If you are an amazing machine learning engineer and you're great at, building agents, that's awesome. If you're going to apply that, to selling toys online, that's not very good, right? And so there's got to be a match and a fit for the best VCs to care.
Yeah. So, I want to wrap up this point, and I have a sort of a parting question for you. One thing that I think that you touched on that I think people might react to is even describing you in your first company is like this fancy person on the open source, sort of authentication side of things. You were a successful enterprise sales rep, and that combination of tech and go to market is like magic. It's like something we've all looked for, and I think there can be a reaction to be like, but like that's so crazily like special. Like how I don't have that. Like how am I supposed to get there? I think this kind of goes back to our initial part of this conversation around like project selection, opportunity selection. Is this the right market to go after? And is this the right time for you? Like, are you even ready to go after something this big and assume that you can attract investors? And so I think that's like where I want to wrap up this part of the conversation is like, the bar is high, especially if you're going after venture capitalists who need to return funds, they will be prioritizing second-time founders like Alex. And for first-time founders, they do need to see those amazing sets of characteristics and maybe like a twinkle in your eye and something that makes them believe that you're going to be able to learn faster than other first-time founders. So important things. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll add something really specific that I used to tell people all the time, and I still believe it firmly, is, in the tech industry, the bare minimum that I think a team needs is they need to have exceptional technical talent that will pass the scrutiny of a technical VC, which is most high caliber VC. So you need to have like the best fucking engineer, minimum founder possible, if not a whole team. But that's not enough. There's many incredible engineering teams that fail miserably, and VCs know to look out for it. You also have to pair it with having real market sensitivity. Like if you have your finger on the pulse for whatever reason, everybody might have their finger on the pulse for a different reason, but if you are like market sensitive, product aware, and you're an incredible technical team, like the best VCs know to look out for that.
Yeah. Yeah. In other funded interviews, Alex, like we go through the twists and turns and the roller coaster ride of raising venture capital. And it's especially twisty, turny, uppy, downy for first time founders because they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Right. But from the surface, it would be like, oh, this was like plug and play. And I assume a lot of this was really easy. But I wonder if you can even think back on the more stressful times, right? Because like, look, you said you could have raised money just by saying, hey, it's like, remember me, and go out, raise money. But you decided you wanted to go to, test the market and figure things out first. Anything you can share about like, it wasn't always like, I knew this was going to work, because like, I don't think you want to raise capital for a bad business either. Like tell me anything that kind of creeped in doubts or any sort of.
Yeah, look, I mean, every company is ups and downs. Every company is stressful. And I mean, we had our fair share and continue to have our fair share of really stressful moments, and we will forever. Right. We were absolutely convicted that the original idea was going to be this site reliability agent to help you diagnose why that server was going down or something.
Hmm.
And we have absolute conviction that was going to be successful. And then we were really surprised when like we couldn't get customers to care, right? And that was really stressful, right? Because now all of a sudden, like my co-founder quit his job, and like I'm sitting here in the wind, and we're like, crap, what do we do? And I'd been through this before, so I had a playbook for like navigating a pivot. Now, thankfully, a pivot of 2 people, which is very much easier, which is why we did it this way. But that was really stressful. So we had to just throw a bunch of shit against the wall and just start calling people and just testing a bunch of ideas. And sure enough, like we started to get a signal, and then we started to feel better. And we went through that like 3 or 4 times. Like we did not just go from one idea to the winning idea. Like we went one idea to a terrible idea to a terrible idea. And actually one of our truly horrific, truly embarrassing ideas was the one that led to the really good idea that is now our idea. And so, and funny enough, we had actually purposefully explored an idea we knew was terrible just for the sake of seeing if we could find insight from it, right? That's a whole other conversation. So we ultimately start clicking into the right thing. We're still in stealth, and we wanted to make sure that what we were seeing wasn't obvious. The biggest risk anyone runs into is you're starting something obvious, and so I didn't want to be starting something obvious, and I was worried that it was obvious. And so what we do really quick, just for the context for everybody, is we make it very easy to connect a large language model to other services. And so if you want your agent, your large language model to go read your email and send an email or interact with Salesforce in any way, Arcade makes that very easy for the developer. And so that we handle all the integrations, but the backbone of it is authentication. Because the reason why ChatGPT can't send an email or read an email is that it can't authenticate as you into Gmail. So that's what we do. We thought this was obvious. And so the one company we were certain was going to be, building a competitive product was a company called LangChain. And we knew the folks at LangChain. And so we reached out to the folks at LangChain to show what we had, to really feel out, like, were they going to be friends? Were they going to be competitors? Just so we knew. And sure enough, they loved it. They were like, oh, this is great. We have this problem. We're running into this all the time. Like, we've had to build some stuff, but it's not what we want to do. And that was great. And when that happened, we were still just chugging along. We had capital. We didn't need more money. But around that time is when suddenly the VC interest really started to build up. And it was premature. We weren't ready. And that itself was stressful, because the thing that people don't fully appreciate is that VC interest is not VC commitment. And so,
it's true. It's very true.
And so, if you take a VC meeting and you're not ready for it, they're going to make a decision. And I didn't want anyone knowing or deciding anything about us until we were ready to tell people we were working with in a very structured way. And so what had happened, this is good for everybody to know, is in the Bay Area in particular, a lot of the best venture firms have a lot of really good engineers on some sort of agreement. They call them scouts. And they're just there to go scout new tech, because they know people like us are calling them to get feedback on our products. Now, those scouts are supposed to tell you that they're a scout. Never do. And so all of a sudden we start getting phone calls from like all the big brands. And they're like, hey, we hear you're working on authentication for agents and integrations for agents. And we're like, how the hell am I figuring this out? So all of a sudden we're getting all this interest prematurely, and that itself is really stressful.
Yeah.
So it's becoming harder and harder for us to tell people no. So we're getting ready. All of a sudden, at the same time, our relationship with LangChain starts to evolve, and suddenly Harrison, the CEO there, wanted to put out a sample application that used us. We were still in stealth, and so we had to come out of stealth in order to go put the sample application out. Much earlier than we planned, which itself was pretty stressful because we weren't ready. And then we knew that once we did that, it was going to be very difficult to keep the cat in the bag for financing. And so we had to basically scramble to get all of our financing documents, our memo, our story really tight, really fast, so that we could hit the button and just be ready to go.
Yeah. Tell me about so I know we'll clean this up a little bit because like there's a lot of cool stuff in here, and I want to be respectful of the timing. Um, I love that you just said, even with all that pressure and force, you're still like, we have to get our story tight, we have to get that stuff together. Even the most stacked deck, needs those things. I think that's important to hear. But I forced you to think about, the failures of your first ideas and the required pivots from terrible idea to terrible idea. So the bad thing. I also want to let you kind of like revel in one of the positive feelings. Do you remember the first call you made, or the call where you were like to a VC that you wanted to hand them a bone and be like, "Hey, we're going to do it now." Do you want to? Yeah. Do you remember what that was and what that felt like?
The funny thing is that we didn't do that, right?
You didn't do that. Hey, you could have done that.
Here's what happened. No, because we got preempted. And so we were planning on doing that. We had our short list of people who I already love, which, a whole side note is like, if you should have a list of, you should figure out a way of creating a list of the very best individuals, because like these are marriages you can't get out of. And there's not all VCs are awesome to work with, and some are incredible. And so I having already been through it, and I was very lucky, all of my last VCs were incredible. I had a short list of people that I knew I was going to call, right? And so I had this list, I had this plan, dude. I had spent so much time manufacturing this wonderful like strategy plan that we were going to execute. And people have been banging on my door, and I told them all, hey, don't worry. Like, I will let you know when I'm ready. Like, don't worry, just chill. And then one of my favorite investors had just started his new fund. I was in the weeds, but I didn't know he had activated the fund. And I love this guy. His name Pete Sunsini. He runs Law Ventures. He used to be at NEA. He was early money at Databricks, Perplexity, and he's
I've heard he's amazing.
He's incredible. And he was on my board at my last company. His first capital into my last company. And so I love working with Pete. So Pete was at the top of my list. So, but I didn't think Pete had activated his fund yet. So when Pete asked to grab coffee, I thought we were going to just jam on life, and his new fund, even though it hadn't activated it yet. I didn't think he was, I didn't think he was a candidate to invest in us just yet. And so I take the meeting, and Pete shows up and sits down.
You sucker.
Such a sucker. I was kicking myself because I know better. Yeah. And so we're sitting there just jamming and just catching up on life. And he's meeting Sam, he's meeting me, and the meeting ends. And we didn't even really get into too much depth. And at the end, he's like, cool. So like, I'm in. And I'm like, sorry, what? He's like, I'm in. And I was like, Pete, we're not raising. And he's like, yeah, no, I know, but you're gonna. And so like, dude, I'll do the whole round. And I was like, whoa, like, wait a second. Like, we need to figure out how much we're raising. And like, there's other, I want to pull together a group of people. And Pete's like, yeah, let's figure it all out. Like, here's term sheet. And so, and we were legitimately not prepared for that. And so it went, we were already getting accelerated in our process. And now suddenly the process turned into like an overnight process. Right. And so I'm crashing into like the very next email was to all the people I had promised I would let know. And then I had to go reach out to them and be like, hey, hat in hand, and be like, hey, I'm letting you know, but like, I'm letting you know that I'm already have a term sheet. And so like, I want to have a conversation with you about you participating in the round as opposed to leading the round. And that was a difficult conversation, very privileged one, but a very difficult one. And sure enough, like we suddenly found ourselves in a whirlwind of process. And we got to be very picky, thank God, but it was still a whirlwind, like you can only process so many venture firms at once. Like I think the cap is like 8. I don't think a human can process more than 8 firms at a time. I think we were, and because ours is so compressed, and I think we were crapping out at around 6. But we had a very targeted 6. And the whole process tipped the tail end of being 2 weeks, and then just trying to like put together the round and the composition in a way that was going to work for the people that we wanted to work with. And we were really lucky. We landed incredible people.
Yeah. And so you ended up, I think, pulling in something like $12 million. You have the money to bring on the best talent, have this beautiful sunny office in South San Francisco. But Alex, I mean, I think this has been a very fun conversation. If you can't tell how much of a dork I am about this stuff, like I could probably have extended this conversation for another hour, But to be respectful of your time, and I know you have a lot to do and build, I want to wrap it up there. But this has been awesome. Great insights. Very excited to see what y'all do at Arcade. And we'll be looking forward to, a follow-up conversation, as I'm sure you have plans on how to deploy capital.
Cool. Well, thank you for having me. It was awesome.
That was Alex Salazar, co-founder and CEO of Arcade, a platform allowing you to securely connect your AI to APIs, data, code, and other systems. What stuck with me the most about our conversation is how, even with his track record as a successful founder, operator, and VC, Alex didn't skip the hard parts. He went back to zero, stayed in stealth, ignored investor noise, and spent months honing his idea so that when they went out to raise, it was for the right reasons. When we come back, we'll hear from my producer, Paige, about what stood out to her about our conversation. There are a ton of easy-to-make mistakes when growing a startup. I feel like I've either made them all myself or seen them all as an advisor and investor. One super common one is waiting too long to bring in expert help around managing company finances. I get why that happens, though. You're not a tiny company anymore, but you feel like you're not big enough to have an in-house finance team and don't want to waste money. My advice to you is to avoid the mistake of just winging it. This is not a time to fake it till you make it. At least talk to someone early so that you can hear about how the additional help could actually save you money and improve your operations. If you're looking for recommendations on who to talk to, check out Propeller Industries. They've worked with hundreds of venture to growth stage startups, so have a ton of deep knowledge to help you avoid major bumps and set your company up for success, whether it's talking to investors or planning for future growth. Set up a free call by going to fundedpod.com/propeller. That's PROPELLER, and tell them we sent you. They're giving Funded listeners a one-time $2,500 new client credit if you work with them for 3 months.
Hi, Jason.
Hey, P, what's up?
It's Monday. I'm hanging in there. I got to get my second coffee after this, and then potentially a pop.
No, I feel like I go into Mondays having Sunday night to think about stuff and have a bunch of ideas that I want to implement, as you heard this morning. So lots of energy. Would love to talk about this one, though.
Yeah, which this episode had a lot of energy. And, we always do bring on a wide variety of guests. So we've had like semi-similar circumstances in the past with different guests that we've interviewed, but no one quite exactly like Alex. So I definitely did want to touch on a few things that I thought were interesting that we could riff about a little bit.
Yeah.
The first thing, honestly, that I'm very curious to your perspective on is I loved his definition of why he chose to do stealth. Like I never fully understood stealth. I never understood the different benefits, advantages, potentially disadvantages that come from it. But his take on how their main reason for being stealth is so that they had the ability to switch and try things a bunch without having the repercussions of the public knowing that and just being able to test all these different ideas out, I think is incredible. So I wanted to kind of talk about that for a sec.
Yeah. And I just so that we can encourage our listeners to go back to other amazing episodes. I think what you're referencing was Scott Kriz and Ian Swanson, two founders who had great exits, great networks, who then went out to raise again. Alex had, even on top of that, a stint at a venture capital firm, a successful stint at a venture capital firm, which is another level of network. And, when I think about someone who has the ability to raise whenever they want, I think it's the purest thing to look at when it comes to strategy.
Yep.
If someone can do it and they're not doing it, is that something to learn from if you're not in that same situation? And so for him, I love the idea of being stealth, because he talks a little bit about if you announce the different impacts that the perception of what you're doing can have. And I'll often talk about this post closing around with founders, which is I have found that, let's say you close your first round, you still probably don't have product market fit. And so your company needs to be able to wiggle to figure out the right way to go. And I'll tell you, if you raise a round and you want the spotlight, you want the limelight to be able to say, yes, I raised $2 million. It really corners you from a mental perspective where you told the world you were building Instagram for cats. And as you went down there, you found out people don't really like cats. They like dogs. But now you told everybody. I did that for our cat lover friend page. But you told the world you were building Instagram for cats. And now it's just ego wise, it's kind of hard to be able to like shift because you've made this big announcement. And I think the same goes in the very beginning when you're kind of just telling everyone. If you're telling everyone and you're even before you're raising capital, it's like, it's just annoying. It makes you second guess the pivots that you need to make. And if you're in stealth, you get to avoid the noise, run your own iterative process to figure out what customers actually want. And then when you get real signal, talk to investors. And in this case, I'll just say too, he had a pure reason to be stealth, but the more clever reason or more string pulley reason is that, man, great example is if you tell an investor no, that'll just make them want to invest in you more. So if they're like, we're not telling you what we're doing, we're heads down, it's like, oh my God, what is Alex working on? So I loved it.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a lot of important parts there. And I also liked the fact that, obviously this is a different type of scenario compared to people who are first-time founders. Maybe they don't have a network, etc. But I do think there is like underlying strategy that still applies. Like even now in the market today, investors it's known that they're looking for a little bit more, right? They're looking for more. They're looking for things to be built out a little bit further, etc. Not everyone has the ability to do that. And yes, although Alex and his amazing co-founder have this background that allowed them to be trusted by more investors a little bit more easily, I think there's something to be said for the amount of time they spent on collecting data. Like, I think I wrote down, he said 2 times a day they would talk to customers until they got the signal. So, I mean, who knows how long that was? But so they were talking to customers, building, I guess, a potential list of customers interested in whatever ideas that they were, focusing on, and having that kind of be their traction, especially when they found the signal with those different customers. So I think that can serve in its own way as a type of traction to show investors, like maybe if you can't build or don't want to build something in code yet, like they didn't either because they weren't sure where the best signal was, you can also come to them and show how much market research you've been doing, and that can show some sort of type of traction in research as well.
Yeah, I love that you called that part of the conversation out too, because it's like, again, Alex could have raised just by like raising his eyebrow. People would have wanted to fund him if he had just kind of twitched in their direction, right? So if this guy who can raise isn't above that process of like, he was like very strict. We're not going to write a line on code until we know what we need to build. If this guy is doing it like that, like, who are you to be rushing into building code or coding something or building product because you feel like you have the insight that no one else has that you can build without confirming with your customer? And so, yeah, it's another example of, Alex was a little bit worried before when we reached out to him about being on the pod. He was like, I don't want to come off as like it was so easy, silver spoon founder who could raise. And I'm like, no, like there are always amazing lessons to be pulled from someone who can raise easily. And I think that's one that we need to triple underline. It's like, not only like, can you build a case and get data and get your version of traction without the ability to build, product. But in most cases, like you probably should be doing that before you're writing a single line of code anyways. So yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Get your version of traction, because I feel like it's easy to be like, we just can't do it. We don't have the technical co-founder yet. We don't have all these things. And it's like, those are very real challenges, actually. Like, definitely don't want to undermine any of those. But I think there's a lot of ways you can get creative, like genuinely, around how to prove that there is an opportunity, how to get your own form of traction, whether it's a wait list or anything with customers that are ready to be signed up for what you're going for. I think that that does show something, and it shows some sort of opportunity. And, you know, if on top of that, they like the founder, they like the team, they like the space, you know, that still can and could push them over the edge, even without you writing code or having a product built.
Absolutely.
Wow. I feel like we're getting good at this.
Hey, you were waiting for me to correct you or like slightly mold what you said, but
I thought you were going to.
spot on.
The other funny thing, I mean, those were like the two things that I really, really liked about this episode, strategy wise, because I feel like in today's market, you just got to get creative. And like, I love these different ideas that founders have around that. And then I also thought, like, I didn't know much about venture scouts before this episode, or just like I've heard of them. I never really understood what they did, what they were.
Yeah.
And it was so funny to me how, like, when he was doing all this research with customers to try their product, I'm like, how do these venture scouts sneak their way in and get, like, how do they do that? What kind of research are they doing to know that he's building?
These
Like,
VCs, they have spies. You know, the best ones have little spies. They want to find the next Alex Salazar who's like making more progress than they want the market to know about. Yeah, and so these scouts who are unidentified as scouts, yeah, they'll get information like this, and it's worth their weight in gold for sure, worth their deal for sure, sir, to like get access to a deal like that.
yeah, it's crazy. But those were really the two main things. I feel like we kind of covered mainly what I wanted to talk about.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't know if you have any other.
I mean, you're so on this now. At some point, you're going to be graduating from this role.
I mean, I can't help it. I have a great mentor.
Awesome. Well, that I think is that.
I think that's the debrief.
Amazing. If you're looking for more insights, strategies, and support around fundraising, subscribe to our newsletter. It's at fundedpod.com/newsletter. And find me on social. I'm at Jayeh, that's JAYYEH, on almost every platform. I respond to DMs and newsletter replies, so hit me up. This episode was produced by Paige Randall.
Hey guys.
Thanks also to John O'Lee from Adamant.
Hey everyone.
And as always, one last thanks to our sponsor, Vanta, the leading automated security and compliance platform.